Okay, and we're back. So, Rooted fam and friends of Red Birth Green, welcome back to another session of Red Birth Green After Dark. I am Erica Goodhouse, conjurer of birth reclamation at Rooted and director at Red Birth Green. And I have the lovely Rowan Jacoba with me tonight. And we're going to have a conversation that goes into a new territory for us. We're going to talk a little bit about sex and gender, and does it matter? Yes, it does. And what are the differences between those two things? So, yeah, let's get to it. Let's talk about it.
Do it.
Awesome. So, last month we spent quite a bit of time talking about what it looks like to decolonize everything. That's where things started off in like bigger conversations over doing lives with Rooted that trickled into our space, talking about decolonizing parenting and decolonizing birth. And so we're kind of continuing a little bit with that theme while also picking up a new hook. And March, if you're not aware, is Women's History Month, which is super fabulous. And I've got some other cool things that we're going to share later in the month. But kind of in honor of that, but also recognizing that we're in a really transitional space socially, that we feel like it's important to utilize this opportunity of Women's History Month to broaden the conversation about what it means to be a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And is that related to sex? Is that related to gender? Is it both? Is it neither? And so we're going to kind of unpack that in our time together over the next couple of weeks. So just as a reminder, this is a live conversation if you're catching us on Thursday night. And we love it when you hop into the comments. Let us know that you're here. If you have questions, feedback, perspective, we're here for that. So always feel welcome to jump into the comments and chat with us. It makes it easier actually to do our jobs too. But we're just really glad that you're here with us. And I'm excited. I'm excited to like step into this territory, and we're here to talk about the things that most people shy away from, but we don't. So, yeah. So with that, I want to start with the big S word, with sex. A lot of people think of that always in the like romantic or erotic sense, but at its core, like sex actually has to do with our reproductive systems and our genitalia, right? And so for most people, like that starts at birth. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because an emerging thing or coming more to the forefront is the idea of sex maybe not necessarily being exactly what it is, right? And bringing into the conversation the concept of the sex that's assigned to you at birth. So, Rowan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I heard what you said about sex being about our genitalia and our reproductive organs, and I want to like echo that, and then also include that it's about so much more than that. It's about like our physiology and what is happening inside of our bodies on a daily basis, like how our hormones are cycling, right? But even within that, there's a huge spectrum. So when people are talking about the idea of sex, of biological sex, and really when it comes down to it, what is being assigned to somebody at birth, what somebody is saying, a doctor, whoever it may be, looking at the genitalia of this baby and saying, this is a male. Well, there's a good chance that there's something else going on inside of the body that you can't see that puts that person more on a spectrum, right? Because it's really easy when we're having this conversation of sex and gender. There is definitely a party of people who like to say, okay, well, you can have your gender be whatever you want it to be, but your sex is your sex, your biological sex. You're either male or you're female. No, you're assigned something at birth. And even in between those two things, yes, you have intersex folks, but that can look like a million different things too. So sex is a spectrum, just like gender is a spectrum. And I think that that's a piece that people often miss.
Yeah, for sure. I would say the word that came up as you were talking through that is emerging. Like that's an emerging idea, even still right now in 2021, when we have all of this progressive thought in so many areas, that I see as an area especially within like the medical community, the clinical community, that's lacking. Um, and, because that there are so many different interactions that can occur within that container, it can be really challenging for folks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this conversation is it's not a new conversation, but the scope of it and the broadness of the net that it's covering now is much larger than it's ever been. This conversation is falling on many more ears, and unfortunately a lot of those ears are deaf at this moment. Like, they're just not hearing what people are saying. And like we've talked about this, just how there are all of these kids who have this gender conversation, sex conversation down pat. Like, they just know. They know how to talk about this. It's second nature to them. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's an emergence. And because we're like now including in the conversation of decolonizing parenting, like, we're now including this consent piece and this this, it's a conversation. Like, you're not like, you're a girl. Some people are. But you say, okay, how do you feel inside? What do you like to do? What does that mean to you? Does it mean anything to you? Does it mean nothing to you? Cool.
Well, and also, what does it mean to be a girl or to be a
Mm-hmm.
boy or to be, to be any of those things? What does that actually mean? Like, I'm so big on like saying, okay, fine, like this is this, but then can you also um like unpack it? Can you redefine what that means? Right?
Yes.
I think growing up, like the terms were always like, oh, like, she's a tomboy or whatever. And that, like, okay, or this is someone who does absolutely identify as female, right? Has like sits like very much in a cisgender world, but is somebody who just likes to be in the dirt and play sports, and like that is that person's identity in that body, right? Like, why does
Totally.
it have to have a label? I guess that's where I always start, is like, do we need to label it? Like, or you can just be Rowan. I can just be Erica. Like, this
Absolutely.
person can just be this person. Like, do we have to like get into all of that? Which is so interesting because, like, again, like the sex part, like it's a label, right? That's placed at birth by essentially a singular set of eyes in
Pretty
most
much.
cases. And so, um, like, how does that work? Like, this is something that people carry with them for their entire life, and we actually don't know anything about that human in that very moment, right? Like, and that human definitely can't communicate anything to us, and it won't be, at least from my opinion, like my standpoint, like until you hit like pubescent age, like, is where you will finally start to see some type of emergence that might give an indication in one direction or another. But until that point, like, unless there's like something like a medical reason to explore further, like, how are we supposed to know?
I mean, because so often what kids are identifying as their gender is entirely based on what other people have taught them each gender is supposed to like, right? So if you have a kid who loves pink things and dolls and dressing up and all of that, and they see from everything around them that that means they are a girl, then they're like, yeah, I'm a girl.
Right.
But they don't have any other context for that other than just how they've been conditioned. Um, yeah.
Yeah. No, the conditioning aspect. I think, there was a period of time like where I think about clothes, right? Clothes for toddlers and like that preschool age,
Mm-hmm.
especially character clothing, right? And so it would be like, oh, like Doc McStuffins, for example. You could only find a Doc McStuffins shirt in the girls section if you're looking for something. But what if you have a boy or presumed boy child who also wants Doc McStuffins?
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate that? And it's like, to see how this like just is so interwoven culturally into the way that we approach literally everything. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it is really challenging to be able to figure out like, how do we navigate next steps in the conversation with something that's clearly complex and a little bit complicated. So yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to call back to something that you said earlier about just like, do we have to label it? How do we have to say these things about like what our feeling, our experience of gender means in terms of a word or a label. And it reminded me of this exercise that when I was in school, I took a feminist film theory class, and for our like sort of journal prompt at the beginning of one class, my professor had us write two different prompts, one of them being, without using any gendered words, describe your experience of your gender. And then, without using any gendered words, describe what you are attracted to. And I just thought that was so cool. Like,
I
okay,
love
now I have to, right?
I love that so much. I feel like, and I'm sitting here, like, of course, I'm like, oh, how does this loop back to parenting? Right. Because but I think it's a real, like, that is also a valid tool for parents to pull out is like,
Totally.
just tell me what you like, right? Tell me how you feel. Tell me what is, looks good to you or is attractive to you, is appealing to you. That, if you get down to the essence of just like, core humans, like that tells us so much more than what an appearance is.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because I have done continued to do a lot of work with kids, and I don't have any myself, but I'm working at a preschool as well right now, and there's there are a couple of boys who say right now that they're boys, and they, like, there's one kid who has like a pink sparkly backpack with like a little picture of a puppy on it or whatever, and a lot of the time at snack he'll pick a pink bowl or whatever it is. And then at the same time, which, like, clearly supportive parents who are getting this kid things that this kid enjoys, and there's still regular conversations and words coming out of his mouth saying things like, oh, look at all of the people at this table are boys, we're all boys here, or like, this is for boys. And I just find that so interesting that, like, there's still like a rift there, there's still gaps happening in their perception where they're like, oh, I have this pink sparkly thing and I love it and that's cool, but also we're all boys.
Right, right. No, and I think I love observing it in that age range, especially like really before they go like off to kindergarten, I think is really when it still is at its purest form and you can
Mm-hmm.
see the interactions for exactly what they are. And I think there's so much that we can do as parents to support that. Like, and a lot of it just comes from like seeing your child first, right? Like just seeing who they are as a person and what brings them joy and how can we cultivate that further. Like
Yeah.
that's decolonizing that mindset that we
Mm-hmm.
have to like fit them into some box or we just let them create their own packaging, right? Like
Yes.
they don't have to go into some like preconceived idea of what they are as, male or female or something in between. But we absolutely can support them in being fully themselves and do the work that we need to do personally in order to facilitate that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have grown up with very different ideas passed on to us just by nature. Like, and I always say it's not out of malice, it's just situational. Like, and I think also I see so much more education from people within communities that um, experience like a spectrum of gender or a spectrum of sex, like being willing to speak up and share their lived experience as a
Yeah,
tool, which is incredibly kind and generous and
definitely.
brave. Like, because I imagine that that's not always been easy, right? But being able to utilize that and say, like, oh, I want something different for, my child or for our family, I think is really powerful, like being able to witness that.
For sure. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about like we've introduced the idea that in addition to gender being a spectrum, so is sex, right? That's a little more like that's a tighter situation because
Sure.
there's really like, yeah, it's just a smaller spectrum, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, but gender is not.
Nope. Not at all.
Gender, gender is like this big arcing spectrum that's,
Yes.
yeah, beautiful. And I am learning new things about the gender spectrum literally every single day. I think that that will be an ongoing thing for a good
Hmm.
while. And yet I observe my own kids and they use terms that I have to go look up
Yeah.
that they just know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do they know this? Like,
Yeah.
and I love that for them. And I love it for me too, because it challenges me, right? For sure. So yeah, so let's talk about the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like that conversation is continuously evolving too, right? There's like, for example, one of the models that people have liked to use over the years is called the genderbread person or the genderbread
Yeah.
unicorn, and it sort of lays out like the different parts of the gender spectrum, right? So you have that assigned biological sex, and then you have the gender identity, which is how one feels inside, how they feel in their brain and their body about gender, and then the expression, so how they choose to express that feeling through um, voice and clothing and mannerisms and all of those kinds of things. And then you have like the attraction piece, right? So like who, and that doesn't even have anything to do with gender, right? At that point it's about like what, as far as like labeling or not labeling oneself, it's like, okay, now I have to say, all right, well, I experience myself as a woman. I feel like a woman, and I like other people who also experience themselves as women. Okay, so I'm a lesbian, right? So then we have to like put these labels on it too, based on other people's gender. And so then it just like becomes so complicated. And really, I like to see all of it inside of, if you can picture like sort of a color wheel, or if you're on a program where you can select a color and you can go sort of anywhere inside of this rainbow in this whole open space, rather than like a line, which if you look at the genderbread person is often just a line in each of those categories, and at one end is male and the other end is female, or whatever it might be. But yeah, that spectrum is just like, it's constantly expanding. People are constantly having new understandings of it. I just think it's fascinating.
Yes. No, I love the gender unicorn. That's one of my favorite tools. I'll definitely make sure that we link that in the comments
Sweet.
after
Yeah.
the live is over so that if parents want to use that, or even as a self tool, right? Like explore that for yourselves. Yes, it's red birth green, but like these conversations are for everyone, right? For us to
Yes.
be able to grow and engage. So we'll definitely link that tool because it's really valuable. And again, I think from like again shaping this from like from a parenting perspective, like being able to normalize that conversation. Like it may be uncomfortable to say, you know what, we're going to do, let's do this as a family activity. Let's all sit down and make our own gender unicorns and see, because I think that also helps us then to see other people differently, and like help to retrain our eyes and kind of break out of that mold of that really finite idea of what someone is or isn't. And I just think that could like be a really beautiful moment as a family to like sit down and start a new conversation.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most powerful tools in becoming an overall more just and inclusive culture and society, is not only like being willing to recognize these differences or similarities in other people, but then to be willing to like explore our own versions of these things, right? So like you can sit there and be like, okay, well, this is how I feel in my gender and it's just going to stay that way. And that's totally fine. And it might continue to stay that way even if you explore it. But just being willing to explore all of those different components of your gender and sex and sexuality and ask yourself those questions, that's really powerful, because then you can come into relationship and conversation with other folks and their experiences of gender and have a much better foundation to work off of in those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Like expanding the vocabulary is key. It's kind of like, I think about like another tool would be like the wheel of emotions, right? Being able
Mm-hmm.
to expand your vocabulary in those areas. And like, this is that version but related to gender. Like,
Mhm.
um, take like for me, like, oh, my kid just used the term. I don't actually know what that means. Let me take the time to go look it up, right?
Yeah.
So that I can like feel hip in the moment, but also so that I can like, oh, I can identify that in someone else, like, and do a self check. Like, does that resonate for me? Okay, no, it doesn't. I'm still in the same seat that I've been, for a while. But I just think it's so important to like broaden that perspective, especially again, like when you're talking about a decolonization lens, like
Mhm.
you know, so much of like the colonization process is about like that regimentation of like putting things in boxes and everything has to have a place and everything has to have a reason. And so for me, like things like, shaking up the sexual identification, shaking up gender identification, like that's like the ultimate of that, of using a decolonization mindset and how you go about in the world. Yeah, like that, that just makes so much sense to me through that lens.
Well, and it just like being able to sit in discomfort also and recognize like where
Mm,
discomfort is coming from, so people who do really struggle with this conversation, like in my experience, so you're just talking about having this as a family conversation, and I can recall a Thanksgiving celebration with my family where there were a couple friends of like my grandma who came to this particular Thanksgiving, and I ended up giving a little impromptu gender seminar. Just, and I used the genderbread person or the unicorn, I can't remember which one I used, but I was just sort of explaining these ideas to these like pretty old men. And one of the people I was talking to was just like, yeah, he was like all about this conversation. And then the other person that I was talking to was like, I'm just really uncomfortable. Like I don't want to look at someone and I don't know. And I'm like, all right, what is coming up for you? Like, what is this discomfort? What are you not comfortable not knowing?
yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And when it comes down
Absolutely.
to it, most of the time somebody's uncomfortable not knowing what's in somebody else's pants. And do you really need to know that? No.
Right. How
No,
does
you do
it
not.
impact your relationship? Right. Like if you're just like in platonic relationship with someone, like how does this impact you? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're at the grocery store, how does this impact you? It doesn't. It really
Totally.
doesn't. Right. And so but we can use our discomfort to create more comfort for other people, right? Can
Yes.
we shoulder some of the responsibility here? And like for me, the answer is yes. Like I feel
Yeah.
again, in that decolonized lens, like some of it is that, like, is how can we share responsibility here in holding burden, right? And a lot of that starts with just being comfortable with being uncomfortable
Absolutely.
and being
Yes.
able to accept that without resolution, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And for so much of this, there's no answer, you know?
There isn't, and again, we've used this word already, but I'm going to keep bringing it up. Evolving, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is, I think, going to continue to be an evolving thing. I don't think that anything that's a spectrum is ever going to be finite.
No.
Like where we're like, okay, this is the answer, and this is what it is. Like
We
I,
finally figured out gender completely. We got it.
yes, unless we just say like the only thing that can be finite is if we finally catch to a place where saying, yeah, sex doesn't really matter. We need to stop assigning it at birth.
Yep.
And gender just is a construct and there's definitely not a binary. And so it just is another thing,
I'll
right?
be fine with that being
Yes.
finite.
That
Totally fine.
that is a finite statement. I would be completely okay with
That
that.
works.
I think about how freeing that could be for so many
Oh,
people.
so many people.
Yeah.
Even the people who right now don't know that that would be freeing for them.
Oh, honestly, especially for those folks.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
because like sort of framing this or contextualizing it inside of like this Women's History Month idea, and like, does it even matter? Well, yes, it does, because history, like we're talking about women being shut down for a very long time. And so like bringing those stories up, but we can't start to like amplify the voices of specifically genders or sexes that have been oppressed without recognizing that there are entire large groups of people who have not had a voice whatsoever.
Yeah.
You know, like, yes, women have been silenced for a long time and other people have been just completely cut out, you know? And
Right.
it's, yeah, I had a train of thought about the not knowing what's in somebody else's pants when it comes to like that discomfort, and then how we like to make decisions as a culture about how we're going to treat or respect or not
Mm,
respect somebody based on that. So that's, I would guess, a good chunk of where that discomfort is coming from is I can't decide how much respect to have for you unless I
yeah.
know what's in your
Or
pants.
I can't decide if I should judge you or not.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a incredible point to make that like it is knowing what's in someone else's pants is a really nice tool for oppression. Like and we can sit with that and be uncomfortable with it, right?
Yep.
Yep. That's what I
Yep,
said.
for
Because it
sure.
is like, yes, absolutely. Like and I think um so I guess let's circle around to the women's history piece
Sure.
because like I keep glancing over. I have this book on my shelf. It's Historic Women of Michigan, and it's really cool to like see all of these people like that were within our state and that did really amazing things. Um, but then I'm like, I wonder, like at some point, 10 years from now, maybe less, maybe more, like, what does something like Women's History Month look like? Is it more inclusive, right? Like, do we like who is allowed to sit at that table and
Yeah.
be recognized? Um, and that always like leaves me, it just makes me wonder, I like to sit with things like that and dream a little bit, be hopeful that maybe the conversation can be different. If we're having it 5 years from now, like, whoa, look at Women's History Month now. Look at all of the people who have a voice that didn't have one before. That would be amazing. Um,
Totally.
and like for me, like that's why it's so important to like bring this topic up um, during this month. Like
Hmm.
it's important to talk about all the time, but I just feel like that's why it feels especially important to talk about it now.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think about like the pieces of that like binary gender spectrum that are associated with women and with females, right? And how those tend to be the things that we don't have respect for, right? So like
Mhm.
being emotional and letting emotions guide you or letting intuition guide you, the softness, the um being willing to engage with people in a vulnerable way, right? And like we need to ask ourselves, number one, why are we associating those with this with a specific set of genitalia? Like there may be some random physiological descriptions if you want to talk about hormones and whatnot, but like that's still not an answer. It's still not an answer for why we expect men or males to be the hard, violent, rational ones, and then the women or the females to be the soft and emotional ones, and why that's bad,
Right.
you know?
Right. Absolutely. Well, I'm just sitting here thinking about like this aspect of it and how like those characteristics that are generally assigned to females, right, are things that generally on both sides of the equation, male and female, like allow people to shit on other people.
Yes.
Like, right? Like if you're compassionate or you have a, softer way of being, then you're weak or meek or not bold, right? And like how
Or
like
you're nurturing and therefore you can have no boundaries.
right right since when is it a bad thing for a human being to be nurturing in just period, right?
Right.
Like if there's someone who identifies as father, I would love to see that father be nurturing, right?
Absolutely.
That would be excellent. And hopefully like that nurturing father is like, hey, we're going to have a conversation about sex and gender and what that looks like and how you can like show up for the people in your life in a different way, right? Like that's just like a human thing. That's restoring humanity, the conversation.
Yeah, it I mean it needs to be, and that is part of the decolonizing conversation too. Just like let's take all of these traits out of these boxes of genitalia that we've put them in. Let's mix them all back in together so that everybody can have these pieces of themselves and everybody can be a fully like well-rounded human and we can be in community with each other again.
Just people,
Period.
right?
Yeah.
So Inika dropped in the chat and said, I've been thinking about topics like this too. I'm currently taking a course called Feminist Psychology of Women, but the feminism is very much not reflective of what feminism looks like today, especially considering now that our ideas of gender have changed greatly since many definitions of feminism have been developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part.
Yeah.
Like all of the textbooks, and I run into this too, like in within birth spaces, right? And teaching a new generation of birth workers. Um, Things are not inclusive and are not representative of the world that we live in now. And yet the tools that we have to have these conversations, right, and to teach, like, are so gendered and
Oh yeah.
like outdated and by like decades at this point. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard. Like, can we pick out the good? Can we use it and pick out the good, or does it actually hold us up from making the progress that we should be? Especially like I'm thinking about a class like that, feminist psychology of women. That sounds super progressive, right? And yet
And
they're
yeah.
like stuck in those same ways of being. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just like any feminist framework too is going to be based in a wave of feminism, right? Whether you're talking about liberal feminism or radical feminism, or also the fact that just like any of these terms are highly academic and often inaccessible to people. Like,
that part too.
yeah, right. We
Maybe
have
that's another night. Like
totally, totally.
I mean, seriously, like that's something like broadening our conversation a little bit right now, like bringing feminism into it. Like it's something that I have a hard time resonating with. I'm humanist. I don't know that I can sit in one camp so much that like it ignores all of these other things.
Sure.
And that feels a little risque to say sometimes, like because there's a lot of powerful work that's been done through the lens of feminism. And then
Mm-hmm.
also, is it dated? Is it time to like use new or find a new term or like rewrite what that actually means?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Probably. I mean, I just think about like when I was learning in school about the different waves of feminism, like the thing that resonated the most with me was radical feminism, because it is sort of that framework of like you take all of the traits that a person can have and you take them all out of the boxes of masculine and feminine, you mix them all back up and people can take whatever they want and leave the rest, and like that's it. You
Yeah.
don't have to associate those with the gender, right? However, radical feminism has been co-opted by folks who are trans exclusionary and transphobic,
Right.
because then they take all of that to mean like, all right, well, I'm going to mix all of that up. So then why do you need to associate these things with your genitals? And
Right.
just
Again,
completely.
that oppressive behavior,
Yes.
right? Based on what's in your pants.
Yes.
Like, I think we're going to put that on a graphic, like or something, because like that's really what it is. Like, why does it matter? Like, the only time it matters is if you're trying to oppress someone else. Truly. Maybe it matters some if you're in a romantic relationship and you might need to like work through some stuff if you like thought of yourself in a different way prior to that. But literally in day-to-day life, it is only a tool of oppression for
Yes.
you to know that level of detail of someone else's life. It's like, how does this actually impact us? And it doesn't. It really, really doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and outside, like, this is always something that's really interesting for me to think of and think about, because like my work in fertility awareness and like being very specific about the physiology of people with ovaries and how it's different from the physiology of people with testicles majority of the time, not always. um but one of those anatomies, if you're going to categorize it in two different anatomies, one of them has been very well researched and studied in the medical field, and the other one has not been looked at all. And so, like, my work is really about bringing that piece up so that we can have these conversations on an even playing field, and then it doesn't matter anymore that they are separate. because we just have an understanding of all the different physiologies
Yes.
and how hormones can exist inside of people's bodies in just the biggest spectrum of ways, right? And it's all good and it's all normal. And if there's something that you individually want to change about it, change it. Whatever. It's none of my business. And
Yeah.
I fully support you.
Right.
You know?
Right. Because it's about personal choice. Like, it has zero impact on my life. So you do you, and I'm going to support you in finding and being the truest and best version of yourself.
Yes.
Right. Like
100%.
that is how we can show up and be amazing for each other. And like that unlocks the door to a better society. And again, ultimately a decolonized one, because it's, we always circle back to that lens as well. And like circling all the way back, like it also like it matters for us, through a parenting lens, because we can be the ones to usher in these conversations and these tools and these words in a really safe way, like, and within, the confines of that trusted and loving relationship at home, and just usher in growth and education. It doesn't have to be scary. Like, we're here to partner with you in that, because I know that can feel really overwhelming too, because it is a detachment from what so many of us were taught and what we grew up with. And that's okay. Again, be uncomfortable. Just say, like, this makes me uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I would appreciate help. Fantastic. Hit us up, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Hit us up. This is what we're here for. I'm going to drop our website on there. You can always reach out to us. We'd love to talk. Absolutely. We can set up coaching sessions. We actually have classes that are going to be coming in the fall. Not quite yet, but in the fall, like, we're going to have classes that lean into these things. Both if you want to turn your young people over to us and have us do some of the education for you, we're here for that. And if you want to feel more empowered or better equipped to do the educating yourself, we're also going to be here for that, which I'm really excited about.
Yes, I love that. Raising kids and parents all at the same time.
Yes, we all have growing and learning to do, so why not do it with a similar mindset in a safe and brave space together? Like, I can't think of a better way to do that. So I'm excited for the things that are on the horizon in that regard. But seriously, we're here to partner and to support, and also to connect. Like, we were talking before we started about how we're really looking forward to being able to come into spaces together again. Fingers crossed. We're planning for May to be able to see you in actual community, which would be amazing.
Oh, so great.
I know. And then throughout the summer, like, to be able to do that on a regular basis. Of course, there'll be opportunities to dance, because it wouldn't be a rooted thing if there wasn't dancing. But mostly we just want to share space and conversation and community, and really lean into what it looks like to build a new village, and engage in that way with one another. So thank you for being part of this conversation with us. And we love being able to show up and speak vulnerably and transparently, and invite you to join us to do the same. Also, invite your friends, share it. Like, if you're like, hey, I listened to this cool thing, pass it on to somebody else. We love that too. So yeah, I think that's all the deets for now. So you can always find us on the web at redbirthgreen.com. Like I said, there's a contact form there. You'll probably hear back from the lovely Rowan when you're looking, if you need birth support, postpartum support. Oh, that's coming too. Oh, so many new things on the horizon. Birth support, postpartum support, parenting stuff. You want to just talk to somebody, you're feeling lost, you need connection, we're going to hook you up. Find us on Instagram at redbirthgreen. And then these videos, these recordings always live on Rooted's Facebook page. And they also live on Red Birth Green's IGTV. So you can find us all the places and pass that wisdom along as you see fit. So
you can find us back here next week too.
Yes. Thursday nights, 8:30, right here. Going in, we're going to talk about it. And I'm excited to continue this conversation, talk about things that maybe are a little taboo or uncomfortable, right? We bring that in. So that's what we're here for. So until next week, it's been lovely, and we'll chat soon. Bye.